What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? I learned that policemen are my friends. I learned that justice never ends. I learned that murderers die for the crimes, even if we make a mistake sometime. And that's what I learned in school today. That's what I learned in school.
Good evening, K-Squid listeners. It's every other Sunday again. This is Sustainability Now, a bi-weekly K-Squid radio show focused on environment, sustainability, and social justice in the Monterey Bay region, California, and the world. I'm Ronnie Lipschutz, your host, and my guest today is Amity Sandage. Amity is the Environmental Literacy Coordinator, the Santa Cruz County Office of Education. She leads a countywide effort to build environmental literacy by increasing student access to outdoor learning. She also supports teachers in using local environmental connections to increase the relevance of core classes and to create opportunities for civic and environmental action. Amity is also the California Regional Environmental Education Community Region 5 Coordinator, through which she connects teachers with the resources they need to bring environmental education into their classrooms. So Amity, welcome to Sustainability Now.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. I wanted to start out by just saying that when I was a kid back in the middle of the last century, we learned about economic geography, you know, what countries produced, and there was a little bit of ethnocentric culture thrown in. So the fact that students learn about the environment now has been a big change over the last few decades. So why don't we start with the obvious question? What is environmental literacy, and what does it include?
Yes, that is a great place to start. As you stumbled on in my title, it's not something. Environmental literacy coordinator is not something that people are used to hearing as a typical job description or job title. I often envy my math coordinator friend or science coordinator, and so environmental literacy is better thought of not as a subject area like math or science, but more as an end goal that the State Department of Education now recognizes as essential for K-12 education. And we have a blueprint for environmental literacy that was released in 2015, and basically is a how-to manual for embedding environmental literacy in all aspects of K-12 education. And they have a definition of environmental literacy in that blueprint. I'll go ahead and read just a snippet of it to help people understand the scope of what their the goal is for students. So in the blueprint, it says that an environmentally literate person has the capacity to act individually and with others to support ecologically sound, economically prosperous, and equitable communities for present and future generations. And that often surprises people because it's not so much talking about the environment and science as talking about communities. But I think with your program, Sustainability Now, it'll make sense to you that we're talking about communities because people rely on the environment entirely for our survival. And so what we need is an environmentally literate population, society that understands the ecology. That ecologically sound portion of the definition is really talking about having students that understand the science and interdependence of humans and natural resources, how we rely on them, clean water, clean air, our food. And then the economically prosperous and equitable communities part really is about how people need to learn how to manage those natural resources and the understanding of trade and economics behind it all, the engineering required, the natural resources management. We need students with all of those skills and also who are capable of working together to make the complex decisions that ensure access for all communities, not just now, but in the future. So then that involves civics and government. So it really cuts across all areas of the education spectrum.
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds like the blueprint, which I actually have open in front of me, and which I put a hyperlink on the blurbs for the show. If people want to look it up, it sounds much more like, developing some sort of global citizenship, I guess is what you would call it, as opposed to just specialization in ecology and environment.
Right.
Yeah, go on. Did you want to add to that?
I was going to just add that it really is. It's wonderful pairing, a wonderful pairing of history and civics education and science education. They go really well naturally hand in hand, and it's a context for teaching any subject that helps students take that content and be able to apply it in a context that's relevant and real for them. So in addition to it being an end goal for the students, that we have students who understand how to steward the environment for future generations, it's also this sort of wonderful tool for teaching all of the other subjects, in that it can make your math teaching much more relevant if you're able to be collecting data on your own environment around you, your schoolyard or your neighborhood, and looking at issues that affect your life every day and how you can improve the environment. And that can be done in science, math, English language arts, every part of it. You can connect that context that makes the learning more exciting and real for students.
So what is your role in all of this? I mean, what does it mean to be the environmental literacy coordinator? And how did you get into this?
Yeah, my role is, well, how I got into this, those are two very different questions and big ones. Wow. My role is to support all of the districts in the county. That's the County Office of Education's role, is supporting all of our school districts in achieving their education goals, and also helping translate what's coming down from the State Department of Education in terms of mandates. So I support the districts with integrating environmental literacy into their plans. Currently, all of them have been integrating it into their science implementation plans, because we got new science education standards a few years ago, and that was a good match. And many of the districts are also looking at how to green their campuses and district practices more, and so helping give them resources to shift their practices. We have some districts who've been doing wonderful work in that area, in terms of reducing food waste and changing purchasing to reduce plastics on campuses, and changing the traffic patterns for school drop-offs to reduce idling, all kinds of, across a range of environmental issues. So there's lots of good work being done in sustainability of campuses, and I try and support that. And then also work in the curriculum realm. There's sort of three pillars, I think of: the campus, the curriculum, and the community and culture. And so in the curriculum realm, I support teacher professional learning to help teachers understand how to use the environment as a context for learning in different content areas, rather than having it be a separate add-on subject that never gets taught. We want to have it embedded in everything. And then community and culture, I play a big role as sort of a liaison between the school system and the non-formal educators across our county. We're so lucky to have a really rich group of environmental education providers in our county, nonprofits and parks and different agencies that offer field trips and programs and curriculum to schools. And so I'm always trying to help build partnerships between the schools and those organizations to have those community-based programs become a part of the formal education of students.
Do you do specific curriculum development, or do you provide just sort of general support? I mean, what I mean is, if someone comes to you and says, I want to incorporate, environmental literacy in my class, in my, economics class, assuming, someone's teaching that, do you actually work with that teacher on curriculum development or provide resources? How does that work?
Yeah, actually, the state has been slowly moving everybody in that direction.
Uh-huh.
There's been there's been legislation passed over the past decade, or even more. Back, I guess, starting in 2004, the state introduced a set of environmental principles and concepts that were created by a group of scientists from the EPA and educators and different stakeholder groups that basically are the foundation of what the state deemed was needed for somebody to understand if they were going to be environmentally literate. So they touch on all those, the interdependence of human and natural systems, mm-hmm. and decision-making around that interdependence. So those EP&Cs, as we call them, the school system just loves acronyms. So
yeah.
If I use one and don't define it, just let me know.
If I catch it.
But, yeah. So the environmental principles and concepts were introduced, and then they started to integrate them into the curriculum frameworks, which are documents that are used by all of the curriculum publishers uh-huh. to create your textbooks for science and history and everything. And actually, just quite recently in 2018, those environmental principles and concepts were established in our education code through a Senate Bill 720, so that it's mandated that all future curriculum that's produced is reviewed to make sure that it has the environmental principles and concepts embedded within it. And so that's happened already with science and history and health, and it's happening now in the arts, and will be going into the math framework next after that. So that's exciting. It means that basically, as the new curriculum is developed, every time a new set of standards comes out or a new framework comes out, when new curriculum resources are developed, they'll be built into those, and teachers won't have to add it.
The reason I ask is that I taught in the university for more than 30 years, and I was basically given a topic, or I could choose a topic for a class, right? And then I did the curriculum. Nobody told me this is what you have to teach, or this is the framework for what you're teaching. So our teachers basically handed pretty much the curricular framework, and then they have to do the lesson planning. Is that how it works in K through 12?
Most districts adopt a curriculum for each content area. So they choose a curriculum from one of the publishers for science, for history, for English language arts, and then get those materials and distribute them to their teachers. And then it's the teacher's job to make sure that they're teaching that curriculum in a way that meets the standards and the framework requirements, which you can't just assume that a curriculum that's available for purchase will follow everything in the framework. They're not all created equal. So sometimes there's still a lot of work that teachers have to do to shift lessons and improve them and change them. And it depends also a lot on the district how much they ask their teachers to follow the curriculum lockstep, and how much freedom they give them to deviate from it and combine different curriculum that they find. So it varies quite a bit. It's up to each district, and there's not a law in California that says a district has to use a certain curriculum. A district could completely create their own, but it's a very labor-intensive process. So usually they start with an adoption of a purchased one, and then adapt it to their goals.
Okay. Well, we need to take a break. So you're listening to KSQD 90.7 FM and ksqd.org, streaming live on the internet. Over to you, Howard. Well, hello, everybody. You're listening to Sustainability Now. I'm Ronnie Lipschutz, and my guest today is Amity Sandage, who is the Environmental Literacy Coordinator for the Santa Cruz County Office of Education. We've just been talking about curricula for environmental literacy and how teachers develop them and how schools get hold of them. So, Amity, can you give a sort of an example of what this might look like in a typical class? I mean, I know that's a broad sort of question, but think of something which wouldn't necessarily seem to lend itself to environmental literacy, if you can, and then what would a class look like?
Yeah, it's hard to say, and there's no typical class. That's one thing about using the environment as a context for learning that makes it so exciting is that you can attach it to your local environment. In fact, that's what you want to do. You don't want to have every kid in the state getting the same lesson about the environment. You want them to be learning about the environment they live in, and it's so diverse in California. And so for us, we have classes like up in San Lorenzo Valley where they're using the redwoods because they're right next to the school to do studies, to do water quality testing, to study the forest ecosystems there. There have been a lot of great projects that have come out of that district in the redwoods. Whereas over in Scotts Valley, their high schools, they have an open space next door, and so they can use that space to connect to the science class there. They've also, that same class has handed over planting areas on the high school campus to students. So students adopt a planting area and decide what plants are going to go there, and with the idea of eventually connecting it with that open space. They're starting to work with a group called Groundswell that does restoration work on our coastal. You may have seen the wonderful work at Seabright Beach and over by Natural Bridges where the ice plant's been taken out and native plants have been put in. That's another project that's happening with students. So Groundswell has worked not only with community volunteers, but with high schoolers and also with Galt Elementary to have students doing that replanting and then going back over and over again to tend to plants and also collect data on what they're seeing there. So it can look so many different ways, and we're so rich in these nature connections, but then you have kids who live in an urban area, and that shouldn't mean that they don't get to connect with the environment. So in that type of space, if they're in the middle of the most urban part of one of the most urban parts of Santa Cruz County, then with those students, it's an opportunity to look for nature in the urban setting and also to learn about how you can increase nature in the middle of a city. So urban forestry efforts or community and school gardens. So Pajaro Valley Unified School District and the city of Watsonville and Watsonville Wetlands Watch have worked together the last few years to have students involved in a ton of tree planting and urban forestry to reduce the heat islands in the city of Watsonville. So it can look like that, too. So it's a really exciting topic in that way, if you can connect it back to really where each student is living and have it reflect that environment. And then you can use that opportunity for them to learn how to better understand the biodiversity of the environment they live in and what it takes to make it sustainable. And they can take on projects like the one in Watsonville to improve that environment, either to increase biodiversity by adding plants or to reduce an urban heat island by adding shade. And that's also helping with climate change by capturing carbon out of the atmosphere. And then the benefits they get, too, in terms of just sheer human joy of connecting with your natural place can't be underestimated as well, because there's an enormous amount of research that shows that the physical and mental health benefits of connecting with the outdoors are very great. And so when we can give students a regular chance to do that and to start seeing nature even in their urban environment, then it's good for their mental health and their physical health as well.
I mean, I guess they're happy to get out of the classroom as well. I do remember that. Is kindergarten included in this effort?
Yes, it's kindergarten through 12th. In fact, TK, pre-K.
Okay. Well, what do they learn? What do they learn? TK is just before kindergarten, and we think of a spectrum. There's really interesting research on environmental identity of people. So we have lots of identities. People have a work identity, your family identity, different cultural identities. And environmental identity is a measure of how much a person feels they are part of the natural environment versus separate from it. And the research around environmental identity shows, not surprisingly, that the stronger your environmental identity, the more you feel you're part of the environment, the more you're willing to take action to sustain the environment, to recycle, to save water, to do all the things that help to change our habits for climate change. And so building an environmental identity starts at the very youngest age with just building a trust in being in nature. So just even with preschoolers, feeling safe outdoors with a trusted adult is the first step toward environmental identity, because you have to feel safety before you can start to explore independently and learn about the environment through your own senses. If you don't feel safe, then you're not really ready to learn. And so you go through these phases of first building trust and then beginning to learn autonomously through your own senses, exploring. And then a next phase becomes, once you've explored and sort of noticed all these things about the environment, then a student is more ready to be taught about the interconnected systems in the environment, ecosystems and humans' connections to ecosystems, and things like the water cycle and carbon cycle. And then the last phase is, once you understand all of those cycles and the connections, is understanding how to make changes in the environment. And that's when you can take on stewardship projects or engineering projects. And to jump straight to trying to teach students to be stewards is not going to be as effective if they haven't had a chance to ever have that experience of feeling comfortable and trusting in nature and having explored it. You can't just skip all that, Mm-hmm. So we want to start young with giving students the experiences out in the garden, on the school campus, or taking walking field trips, or just having a little planter outside the classroom to observe, or even little terrariums in the classroom to look at living things. So it's never too young to start. Yeah, you'll pardon my bringing up my own experience since it was so long ago. But as I mentioned earlier, we had nothing like this in K through 12 in the 1960s. I mean, my exposure to nature was going out and play. I grew up in Houston, going out and playing in the bayous, and so and of course our parents always warned us not to do that.
Right.
So I'm sort of curious though about do small children feel unsafe outdoors, or do their parents tell them that it's dangerous out there? I'm just curious about that.
It varies. I think very young children tend not to. I think they're naturally curious, but you do over time get told to be, careful of things. And so I've had over my career, people who that environmental identity spectrum does not just apply to kids. I can meet teachers or adults who are extremely uncomfortable doing a garden education program because they're so worried about the bees and the creepy crawly things, and they just haven't been around and exposed enough to realize that these creatures are not going to attack them without some provocation,
Yeah, sure.
And so giving people those experiences, sometimes that spectrum starts with a first experience in high school. I mean, that definitely happens. Or kids who go on outdoor science school in 5th grade and they've never been to the redwoods before. That experience gives them that comfort level that they didn't have before when they first left, and that's life-changing.
I'd like, after our next break, I'd like to hear some more about the outdoor science school. But one question I wanted to ask was: so do you follow kids through their K through 12 tenures to see what sticks with them? Is there any kind of tracking that's done?
We're just now starting that effort a little bit with our Teacher Leadership Institute, which I can share more about later. We've been working with teachers the last 3 years and tracking the effect of the professional learning they've been doing on their teaching and their sense of environmental literacy. And just right now, we're starting a survey for their students to track and use over time to see if we're shifting students' attitudes about the environment and their understanding and their confidence in figuring out things about the environment using science skills.
Yeah, that's a little tricky, the before and after part, I guess, right? I know that evaluation and assessment is extraordinarily difficult, having had to try and do it at the university as well. But there's this obsession, of course, with quantifying what students learn, and then saying, look, they have or they haven't. Standardized exams and things like that. There are no standardized exams on environment yet, I suppose.
There are items in the standardized tests that relate to those environmental principles and concepts in the science, the new science test. Yeah. So now, as new tests get developed to go with any new curriculum, there'll be elements of that track students' understanding of the environmental principles and concepts.
Well, that's interesting. Well, let's go ahead and take another break, and then we'll pick up on some of these topics we mentioned. So you're listening to KSQD 90.7 FM on your radio dial and ksqd.org streaming on the internet. Well, as the man said, this is Sustainability Now, and I'm Ronnie Lipschutz, speaking with Amity Sandage, Environmental Literacy Coordinator for the Santa Cruz County Office of Education. We've just been talking, I guess our last thing was I was asking about how environmental literacy is incorporated into classes, especially for young children. Amity, you mentioned the outdoor science school. I think that's what it was. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. Our county office of education has an outdoor science school called Santa Cruz County Outdoor Science School. It's up in the redwoods above SoCal, up one of those canyons there, and has been around for decades. There are programs like this all across the state. They've often been called, you might have heard of them as science camp. Typically 5th or 6th graders are the ones who go to science camp or outdoor science school for a residential experience. So they go and they spend several days and nights in nature and have naturalists who are their teachers while they're there, and they often mix with other schools that come to the same site, and so there's so much learning that goes on. They learn about the ecosystem that they're living in, and they also have a lot more independence being away from home like that. For many of them, it's the first time, and they go on like a night hike and have all these sensory awareness experiences, and also study the science of the natural environment that their camp is in. And so our outdoor science school also has high school students who come back as cabin leaders and volunteer to be with the young ones and help the naturalists, which is a really exciting leadership position for them. And they're always students who were campers in the past, and that's a fun role for them, and a powerful one for the younger students, because they get to see someone who looks just like them and is just a little older being a role model out in nature and making them feel more comfortable. And that outdoor science schools also just recently began offering an on-campus program called Science Outside for younger grades to have more outdoor learning happening on campus, so that students can get more access to nature every day and not think of it as this place you have to go far away to and need a special bus to get to, but that you can find bits of nature even in your schoolyard or just in your neighborhood. And so they have a kindergarten through fourth grade set of programs where their naturalists can come to the school site and take a class outside and teach outside lessons that match with the science standards for that grade level. So that's an exciting addition. And then if they're doing that for several years, by the time those kids get to science camp, I think we'll see a really a big difference in how ready to learn and go deep in the exploration of the environment those students will be, because they'll have had this foundation built over time before they go.
Mm-hmm. I'm just curious, do you incorporate, are you going to incorporate anything about wildfire into the camp?
Yeah, we actually did offer some teacher training using a curriculum called Project Learning Tree that's been around for a long time, and they have fire-focused units available for teachers. The outdoor science school curriculum, I have not talked with the director about whether they're going to change their science camp program curriculum to incorporate that at all. It would make sense to, for sure. We've just been so busy since the fires, and they've actually adapted their program to serve students who badly needed support for distance learning on campuses outdoors. So they've had their instructors going onto campuses and working with students outdoors during the school day while the students are actually on their computer doing their distance learning, but outdoors, because it was safe enough to do it distanced, outdoors, masked, and those students get support for their distance learning because they come from a household where their parent is teaching or working, an essential worker or something, where that student was not going to be able to be succeeding with their distance learning without some assistance. And after they get help with their distance learning on the computer in the morning, then those same naturalist instructors engage the kids in outdoor learning activities on the campus, rain or shine. So it's quite an innovative program and has been successful rolling it out these past few months, but that's made the outdoor science school extremely busy.
So what about students who the rest of the students, the ones who didn't get burned out, what are they doing this year? Students still doing field trips? Yeah. So I'm just wondering.
All outdoor science schools have been closed in the state since the shutdown, and just residential programs have not been able to be put together in a safe way with COVID, and even regular field trips have been pretty much they've been entirely on hold in our county. I don't know about all counties, but our county has been pretty cautious. So there's been no busing to field trips and no gathering of students outside, except in these small groups for students who need the support. Otherwise, they will be left, without any education.
So, how are students, learning this stuff this year? How have they been doing that?
They've been doing online education only, and for our environmental literacy work, we have just an incredible range of partners in our county. Like I mentioned, the different organizations, some of them nonprofits, some California, state parks, and the marine sanctuary and reserves. So there's probably 35 or 40 organizations that serve Santa Cruz County with field trips and programs. And we've been working with about 15 of them the last 3 years with our Teacher Leadership Institute. So that group we know very well, and they know the standards very well, and they worked together with us and with teachers to take their field trips and create distance learning versions of them, virtual versions of the field trips, and are piloting them with teachers right now. So they're doing these lesson sequences where the students sometimes go on a virtual field trip, or they meet in the virtual classroom with that environmental educator, and they have a whole series of lessons that connect to the local environment and to their classroom content for science. And so that's been one of the ways that we've been shifting what we're doing for environmental literacy during COVID. And 5 of those organizations actually banded together. We had a request for help from a school at the end of November, looking for a way to have their teachers be able to prepare for hybrid learning when students come back. Half of them come back and half are at home, and it was going to be this whole new way of teaching, and the teachers were feeling like they needed to do preparation for that, but meanwhile they're teaching full-time with distance learning, which is incredibly labor-intensive because there's no curriculum created for it, so teachers have to do so much extra work. And so a principal reached out to us asking if there was any way these partners could maybe put together a virtual outdoor education week and basically have the students do outdoor ed virtually all week long so the teachers can work on preparing for hybrid learning. And so they did that for a week. It was fantastic. The Coastal Watershed Council and Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History and the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary and Santa Cruz Climate Speakers and the Bird School Project and our Outdoor Science School were the organizations that made that happen. So people have just been innovating like crazy to meet the demands of the current COVID world. And now we're transitioning to hybrid, so we'll have to come up with a whole bunch of new plans. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, if life ever gets back to normal, then, all of this will be back on the shelf, I suppose. You mentioned the Teacher Leadership Institute. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. We, as I mentioned, the science standards changed several years ago. We had had old science standards, which were very old school, like memorize a bazillion facts about science and regurgitate them for a test.
we call that 20th century education.
Yeah. And so we finally got these new standards, which are just beautiful, that have an equal weight for learning information about what scientists have already figured out and equal weight for doing science, learning the skills that scientists use to figure things out, and then equal weight to these cross-cutting concepts that larger concepts that connect across all kinds of disciplines, math, science, and English, everything like scale and structure and function, and there's a few of them, and so it helps with metacognition and
Right.
Reapplying your learning. And so when we began training teachers in these new standards, we decided to integrate environmental literacy at the same time. This is a unique effort in our county, that we have a countywide science initiative where all 10 of our districts decided they're going to work together on preparing their teachers for the new science standards and have environmental literacy integrated at the same time. And we recruited teachers strategically across the county to try to get 2 teachers from every school site in the county, at least, so that you'd have a common understanding and vision of this new way of teaching and doing science education across all the schools, so we could really have equitable science education. And then we brought in these science partners, these community-based science and environmental education partners, to learn alongside the teachers about the new standards, and then they co-designed lessons together in grade-level groups. So all the first grade teachers got paired with an environmental education partner, and they designed a lesson sequence for the standards at that grade level that integrated field-based experiences to make sure that going outside and learning about the local environment was not a fun field trip add-on that's completely disconnected from what they're learning in school, which is, it has its benefits that way, but to use it as a lever for making the learning in the school more relevant and engaging, and to give more access to outdoor learning than just an occasional field trip, we had this design. So that happened for K through 12, every grade level. The past 3 years we've been doing it. We did 2 different cohorts. So there's a teacher in or 2 teachers in almost every school in the county, and they're still networked. So they're a wonderful group, very inspiring. And now with this coming summer's institute, we'll move to trying to help them. So we think of them as they were emerging teacher leaders when they applied for the program, and we selected them, and now we think of them as they're the teacher leaders who are now going to share their learning with their other teachers at their sites. And that way it will reach all teachers, because otherwise with these professional development institutes or professional learning institutes, you always get the teachers who are already interested in that topic.
Right.
And how do you ever reach the people who are not, who are uncomfortable or who don't feel confident? And so this is the approach we hope to use, and it's already begun because some of the teachers are so amazing. Last year at Santa Cruz City Schools, several teachers from the Institute, their district decided to give them time in their schedule to train the other grade-level teachers from their site, actually, I think from across their district. They got time in their professional learning days where the teachers were teaching other teachers, which is fantastic.
We need to take a break. So you're listening to KSQD 90.7 FM on your radio dial and ksqd.org streaming on the internet. Well, hi, this is Ronnie Lipschutz. My guest today on Sustainability Now is Amity Sandage, who is the Environmental Literacy Coordinator at the Santa Cruz County Office of Education. Amity, how do you integrate environmental justice and equity into environmental literacy, the classes and the field experiences?
I'm glad you brought that up. Well, I'll say actually that equity is the starting point for all of this work. It's actually very unusual for a county office of education to have a full-time environmental literacy coordinator. Wow. That was something that happened as a result of the vision of our previous superintendent and then our amazing current superintendent has continued to support the work. But Michael Watkins was, he grew up in the East Bay, and I remember him telling me about how he felt like he didn't know people could have trees in their neighborhood until he grew up and left his neighborhood, and that when he saw the differences in access for students across our county to the wealth of natural resources and programs that we have in our county. Like I mentioned, we're extremely rich in environmental education programs and organizations compared to many places in the state. But there wasn't equal access to those things across all the schools. And so he launched that county science initiative because we were also seeing that the students that were taking part in our science fair were primarily white and from certain regions, and so he launched this work really with equity in mind, which is ironic because environmental conservation is often thought of as a very white area sector, and so we're really consciously trying to work toward equity in access and also honoring the different ways that everybody has relationships with the local environment and with the environment where their culture comes from. So we've been connecting and working to better understand our first people of our region. So we've reached out to our Amity Tribal Band chairman, Valentin Lopez, has been generous enough to work with our outdoor science school naturalists and came and helped out with a teacher training workshop that we did in partnership with the UCSC's History and Civics Project. So to better understand their environmental literacy, because the Amamutsin people, if you look at the history of indigenous people, they're environmentally literate in terms of modeling what environmental literacy looks like. Like the rituals that people, that the Amamutsin tribal band had from Valentin's description were really based on ways that preserved the biodiversity of the region and preserved the food sources that people relied upon. And I think science, as it's looking at indigenous practices, is showing that those burning techniques and different harvesting techniques were actually sustainable practices, though they were often described in the literature as rituals or religious practices. And so we've been working with that group. Sorry, were you going to ask something?
No, I was going to say, I had Val Lopez on the show about a year ago. For those of you who want to listen to the broadcast, you can listen to it. The other comment I wanted to make was I guess is a sort of sardonic one, is that we're ritualizing science, right? That in a way that but never mind. That's just a throwaway statement. Do students learn this historical background to environmental injustice, and even how in Santa Cruz County?
We're definitely working to increase the resources for teachers in that area. We have Ferris, Sabah, our superintendent, has launched an initiative for racial justice and equity that is just now rolling out. So we're starting a new community of practice for teachers, for educators, and we'll also have a youth group, a student group with that focus as well. And for me, it's being integrated into the environmental, the Teacher Leadership Institute. So at our last institute, we had a session focused on environmental justice where the participants got to think about what their definition is of that, because again, like environmental literacy, it can mean many things to different people.
Sure.
And
Sure.
so getting clear about, are we all talking about the same thing? So they did a reading and discussion, and then we looked at this wonderful tool. I don't know if you've ever seen the Cal EnviroScreen tool.
Yeah,
The
I've heard of it. Yeah,
Cal
yeah.
EPA.
Yeah.
You can look at the level of environmental health hazards in any community region across the state and see where people are at higher risk of environmental health issues. And and so we looked at our county and localized it, and then we had a panel at the Teacher Leadership Institute with Regeneración, the Pajaro Valley Climate Action. They've done a lot of work surveying and working with our farm worker community to find out how much of an impact the increasing temperatures are having on them health-wise and other environmental factors, pesticides. And we had the City of Watsonville's climate project coordinator with us, Justin Meek, on the panel. And the teachers got to develop questions and then have a fishbowl discussion to pull it all together, what they'd heard locally, what they'd read, and then so we're definitely increasing the focus on not just environmental literacy but environmental justice, and trying to pull in more resources, because those resources aren't in the general curriculum yet, so we're having to pull them together for teachers. And then the other way that I think that we'll get more headway in environmental justice, and which is one of the areas of work I'm most excited about, is through our youth programs. We have a youth engagement and leadership initiative, and the first youth group that began under that is Youth for Environmental Action. So our county has launched last school year, invited youth from every high school in the county to apply to be on this Youth for Environmental Action leadership team. And we've very intentionally been trying to recruit students from every school and who don't have to have any leadership experience. Like it's a lived experience and commitment to acting on behalf of the environment is more important than coming into it already having had some leadership job in your school. So we wanted to make sure we had these opportunities for students who are passionate about a certain topic in our community. For us, for me, it's environmental literacy and environmental justice and conservation. But there's also a youth group now that there's one that's for youth council for arts. So arts in every school, like basically students who are concerned about the arts being, not available to all students. And then there's a countywide Black Student Union, and we'll be launching one with the Racial Justice and Equity Initiative that will be focused on racial justice issues across, not just for students of African descent, but other students of color as well. And then there's the the Queer and Trans Youth Alliance. That's another countywide youth group. So these different youth groups are working individually on their issues, and then are coming together. They're going to start coming together once a month to share what they're doing. And I went to Jerry Brown's Climate Action Summit that he held right before he was done with his last term as governor up in San Francisco, because Michael Watkins was on a panel at an education affiliate event there. And they had students speaking at this event where, like, Michael was on a panel of all these superintendents and leaders from schools across the country, or across the state. And no, they were from other states as well. And then there were scientists, very impressive folks. But mixed in were these students, high school students, and a UCSC student, Maxine Jimenez, I remember, spoke. And I just remember that all of these, these incredible scientists and policymakers, all they could talk about at the end of the day was what the students had said. And we need to connect our youth with the adult decision makers to really make progress, because they are the ones who are going to inherit this future. And they have ideas and demands about what they want adults to be doing. and so this Youth for Environmental Action is really about trying to elevate their voices and help them connect with the adults who can help them really impact what's happening in terms of conservation and environmental protections.
So, Amity, we're out of time, I'm afraid, but it's been a really wonderful conversation, and I want to thank you for being on Sustainability Now.
Thank you so much for having me. The time flew by.
You're welcome. Yes, it did. In 2 weeks, my guest will be Dr. James Estes, Emeritus Professor of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology at UC Santa Cruz. He's best known for his research on southern sea otters, once almost wiped out, then recovered, and now again threatened. That's Sunday, March 7th, 2021, from 5 to 6 right here on KSQD. I want to thank you for listening, and thanks to Howard Felstein for today's engineering, and to all staff and volunteers who make K-Squid your community radio station. So until next every other Sunday, Sustainability Now.
What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? What did you learn in school today, dear little boy of mine? I learned that policemen are my friends. I learned that justice never ends. I learned that murderers die for the crimes, even if we make a mistake sometime. And that's what I learned in school today. That's what I learned in school